Hello and welcome to the Collecting Heroes podcast. I'm your host JD, the collector of collectors, and this is the place where I interview pop culture collectors from around the world. Today, it's time to read between the lines with my next guest. His name is Albert Aquino. He is from New York and he is a comic book collector. So, Albert, thank you for being on the show.
Hello, well, thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk to you about comics. As you may guess from the background, we haven't even discussed this yet, a little bit of a Batman fan, just perhaps. You can tell who my favorite comic book hero is, but someone who's read a number of comics myself when I was younger and in my adult years. Speaking with someone else who's passionate about that, I'm really keen to geek out with you today and get into it. But the way I always sort of start this off when I talk to people, I always start from the beginning. So with you being a comic book collector, where did your passion for reading start from, and comics in particular?
Oh, I appreciate you asking that. It's always so hard for me to answer that question, just because it always feels like it's always been there. So my father used to read a newspaper, and he'd bring it in home. I'm 32. I'm not like 15 or 20 years old who's not reading newspapers or not, newspapers are a thing of the past, I feel like. But in the newspaper there'd be a comic strip area, so I'd always just gravitate towards that just because I
Yes.
was so impressed. There's always a funny punchline that is guaranteed to make you smile.
Yes.
And I'm an easy laugh, so I would laugh hard. So I would get into that, and then I remember Calvin and Hobbes. That was a story that I was just blown away by. It was a
A
story of a
classic.
boy with this pet tiger, and it was just so funny. And it felt like it was targeted towards kids, but it really was for adults because it
Yeah.
had really intelligent humor. So I started off with a lot of comic strips and just occasionally picking them up on the side there, here and there. And then I had like a lot of kids my age when they were maybe 10 or 9. Pokemon cards were the rage, like Game Boys and
Uh-huh.
Pokemon Red and Blue, and are you Team Charizard and Blastoise? Now as an adult, I realized everybody was Team Charizard. Anyways, I had a local comic book store that I could walk to in the Bronx, and it was called Magnum Comics, and I would go there to pick up Pokemon cards. And I remember it was a small store, like the entire wall behind me as I'm looking through the Pokemon cards, just comic books, comic books, comic books. And, it wasn't very hard to sell me on them. So if I had a little extra money, I'd be like, hey, which character am I going to get into? The Tobey Maguire era of Spider-Man was out. So I was like, I'll start with Spider-Man. I was really into the X-Men animated show, so I picked up some X-Men comic books. And the series that I remember starting with was called Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men. Are you familiar with those titles?
I'm familiar with titles. I haven't read a lot of them, but
Yeah.
through my years of being familiar with pop culture
Yeah.
and comics, I'm familiar with those. And obviously, that was going to be one of my questions to you as a follow up. But you're already answering is
Oh yeah,
where did
right.
you start? What were the first ones that you picked up off the shelf?
Well, Ultimate Spider-Man was a big one, and Ultimate X-Men, and the reasons why those I really gravitated towards were because they were a retelling of Spider-Man, of X-Men, but
Yeah,
in a modern world.
yeah.
So there was cell phones, and there was it's just a realistic world. And I didn't know that at the time. I just picked it up because I liked the artwork. I thought it was
Mhm.
cool, and the story really got me. And one of the things, so I'm right now my day job, I'm an educator. I work in the nonprofit world in after school programs. I teach kids academics. I do robotics. I do math. I also do track and field with the kids. But one of the things that I've really learned about myself through reflection in the time is realizing that when I was younger, I wasn't a really great reader. When I read traditional novels, just all text, I would only read dialogue. Everything else, I would
Oh.
skip because I couldn't really comprehend it. I'd have to reread the paragraph over and over and over again.
So you
So I'd
missed
read
context along the way? How does that work?
I yeah, so I don't know if you've had the experience, you're reading a book, maybe you're tired and you read a whole page and you're like, I don't know
What
Well,
happened?
I read it. I just don't know what happened in that whole page.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yeah, yeah. I've had that. Yeah,
So for children, that happens all the time. Like they'll literally read it out loud, and then you'll ask them, "Hey, what did you just read in that paragraph?" And they won't be able to tell you. It's just like it's a comprehension thing.
yes.
So for me, when I would pick up a comic book, it was way easier to follow the story. Again, it was only as an adult really reflecting on like my experience as a reader and like how I developed into a reader. I realized like, oh, like reading comic books really supported me, and it got me all the juicy stuff that everybody's looking for in a good story. Like you're looking for characters that are well developed. You're looking for a setting that feels real. You're looking for a plot that makes sense and is exciting and challenging, and for challenges that are worthy. You know, and I always go back to like Spider-Man is like my Bible. The ethical parts of his character were the things that like I was looking for as a kid. I went to Catholic school, and I remember not really connecting with the Bible as much as I kind of was feeling I had to, or I was being expected to.
Yeah.
And then I was reading superhero comics, and I was being told like, "Hey, you shouldn't kill." And I'm like, "Whoa." Like, but the military kills, police kill. Why does the Bible says not to kill, but there's lots of cases of people killing. So why this really interesting, fun story with these characters but not killing? Oh, I'm curious. And then that those ethical questions as a kid, I was so hungry for them.
So that really molded who you became as a person and your moralities, I guess, as you were growing.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like I think a lot of people when you think about superheroes, I mean, people love like the Deadpools and the like, the fun characters who are like anti-heroes,
Yeah,
but the traditional heroes are the ones that hold up the entire industry because
yeah,
they're ethical characters. They stand by, like, think, I mean, you have Batman behind you.
hmm
Batman has one of the most interesting ethical dilemmas of all time. He doesn't kill any of these people. He puts them in jail over and over again, knowing they might leave, but
yeah.
he decides to do that and not kill them, and it's fascinating why.
And
You
knowing that
know,
other people may die as a result of that, like one, if they do re-release and or they do escape and get out, he knows that someone else may die. And you're right, there is that massive ethical dilemma that happens with him. And it's funny, even to the not having guns, which has evolved over
mhm.
time. Obviously, he started with with
Yeah, yeah,
guns, but
yeah.
and then evolving to a character who doesn't use guns, and the way that's evolved. But yeah, definitely there is that ethical quandary that happens, and I love that. I completely identify with what you're saying there. Take me back again, sort of when you first walked in to a comic book store. You're getting the cards, then you start picking up the comic books.
Yeah.
Where did that grow? Like, so because I actually saw you had a recent reel where you went in Target and you picked up the Pokemon cards again, and you were looking at them on the shelf. Uh, are they something you still collect? Do you still have the cards from your childhood as
No,
well?
so I oh man. So the way my brain works is a problem sometimes. I collect hobbies.
Yeah.
So I have to be super careful because if I pick up too many hobbies, it'll just completely dominate my life and my
Uh-huh.
brain. So I when I went into Target and I looked at the Pokemon cards, and I have a ton of people around me who collect Pokemon. And I secretly want to really bad, but I know if I dip my toes in the water, I'm gonna be living in that pool, like
Yeah.
it's so I did not pick up that set. But and I don't have any. I have like a small box of like very small, like maybe 30 cards,
hmm
and I pull them out every now and then for my daughter. I'm like, hey, you interested in Pikachu? Like that kind of stuff.
And what
Yeah.
about, again, going back to that childhood moment, picking up like the Amazing Spider-Man? You said in the Bronx, so it was in the Bronx. Is the Magnum Comics? I think you said was the name
Yes, it was. Yeah, Magnum
still
Comics.
there?
Yep.
Is it still there these
No, they're
days?
not there anymore. No.
Oh, that's a pity. But so you grew up in New York City,
Yeah.
so you're collecting comics from the Bronx. You've got a character who's literally within New York City. Was that the
Yeah.
other draw card for you with Spider-Man? Is that you were seeing the places from your surroundings as a childhood?
It's so interesting. So like being a New Yorker, there's so much media that has New York as its centerpiece, right?
Yes.
And it's not just like comics. I mean, it's like every TV shows, music. Like it's
Uh-huh.
such a. But
Uh-huh.
when you're in New York, it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel. It feels like, of course, this is like. Of course, all the TV shows are filmed here. Like this is the greatest place ever.
Yeah.
But it also this is my home. Like I don't know anything else. A lot of people don't leave New York for a long time. Sometimes their whole lives. You know, I have friends who grew up in Queens and had never been to the Bronx, and grew up in the Bronx, never been to Manhattan. You know, like Times Square. There's New Yorkers who have never gone to Times Square, so it can be. Yeah, so I definitely found a lot of connections, you know, with a teenage superhero. You know, like of course I was really into it. I was really into Static Shock. I don't know if you're familiar with that character.
I
Um,
am. I haven't read any of the comics, but I know
yeah,
the character. Yeah.
yeah, but the animated show, I was like, "Oh, this is incredible," you know, just because he was black. So I was like, that wasn't a common thing for me to see, like teenage black superheroes. So I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
like that's my guy too." So it was fun to see, you know. It's not very obvious from the way I look. I'm Dominican, so my family's from the Dominican Republic, a country in the Caribbean. New York City has a massive number of immigrants from that area. That our ethnic background is like European, African, and Indigenous Native American.
Okay.
So that's my blood makeup.
How?
So
Hence
yeah,
the Aquino.
Aquino, they were Spanish colonizers who took
Yeah.
over the basically a lot of the Caribbean, a lot of Latin America. So that's where the Catholicism comes in. I'm not Catholic anymore, but raised Catholic,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, seeing I strongly identify with like the black community. A lot of times seeing it reflected in my in artwork and in music and comics, it's like yes, like it's made for me. A lot of times it feels like that.
How did you feel about is it Black Lightning? Is that the name of the TV
Yeah,
series that is also based on the character?
yeah.
Um,
So Black Lightning is a DC superhero.
yeah,
He's got a comic book and everything. I mean, he's a great character. He's good. It's funny, you know, a lot of black superhero characters have lightning powers. I don't know if you know this. This is like a weird thing.
oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean Halle Berry,
Storm.
Storm, yes, of course,
Yeah,
that's the name of the Storm. Yeah, you said Static Shock, Black
Static Shock,
Lightning.
Black Lightning. There's a few other ones. I forgot what they are. I can't. They're not coming to mind. But it's like a common trope. It's like, and it's almost at the point where it's like you have to honor it. It's funny.
It's because you
It,
guys have electric personalities, right?
that's what it is.
Yeah, that was a bad joke. I'm sorry. You're the father here on the call. I don't know why I'm making the dad joke. You mentioned your daughter, like it's showing her the cards and stuff. Do you read
Comic
books
books
as
all
it
day,
comes
all
to
day.
it?
She's obsessed.
Yeah.
So I think as a parent, right, there's a thought process that comes when your child is born, right? Like how the values that my parents had, right? They assumed my child's gonna have these same values.
Yeah.
But obviously that is not how it goes, right?
Yeah.
You're lucky if your kid shares your same values with you. You try your best to pass them on, right? But that's not always the case. Like my parents, we have significant disagreements or whatever on a bunch of things. And but most things we agree on.
Yeah.
But like my father and my mom, they don't have a passion for comic books at all. Right. So I'm intentional about exposing my daughters to comics as much as possible. And I'm talking about a 3-month-old too. Like she's seeing it too.
Hmm.
And my 3-year-old, there's on Disney Plus, there's a show called Spidey and His Amazing Friends, and it is made for toddlers. And I am so grateful for it. It shows her everything. She knows Peter Parker, she knows Gwen Stacy, she knows Miles Morales, Doc Ock, Rhino,
Who's her
the
favorite?
Hulk. Right now, she loves Doc Ock because it's a female character, and Ghost Spider, which is Gwen Stacy. Like,
Yeah.
or yeah, we, you know, it's funny. We don't really like teach her how to be a girl, but she loves all the girliest things ever. So she's like into nail polish and necklaces and hair and every female character. She's like, that's for me. Like, so she loves Ghost Spider. She loves, you know, any female character. She immediately like looks to identify with them.
There are so many. strong female characters within comic books, and over the years, how
Yeah.
they've changed, obviously, and I say this as a middle-aged white man, but how those groups of like ethnic minorities or women, how they're represented, and how that's changed over the years. Like, it's really great to see that evolve the way it has, and to have the writers that are able to now share their passions from their backgrounds as well, like Nicola Scott, it just is the first that comes to mind as a female comic book writer. It's great, the strong characters that they can bring forward, and the way that they evolve. I also think of, so for me, I read a number of different graphic novels, and there's Why the Last Man, not written obviously by a female, but has these really strong female
Yeah.
characters along the way, and even the way that the TV show has represented them. I've loved watching as well. Is there anyone as a female character that stands out to you from your time reading?
So one of the things that I always try to do is try to see any like gaps in my, not gaps, but like what biases do I have when
Yeah,
I'm reading
yeah,
books? And I look at my collection and like I have a pretty like, it's pretty stacked.
yeah.
Most of the and I try to have, women, I try to have men as the lead characters. I try to like get as much of that diversity.
Mhm,
Um, the thing that I'm trying my best to do is to get more female writers in my collection.
mhm.
And in traditional comics like Marvel and DC, there's not a lot. And it's a really frustrating thing because like I'm trying to read the best books possible.
Yeah,
So like when I'm looking at the same thing everybody else is doing, like go to Google or you go to other like social media people who you trust, what books do they recommend?
yeah,
And it's always men. And I'm like, like, I'm gonna spend $30, $4, $50 on a book. I want it to be worthwhile. So like taking a risk, it could sometimes feel like, okay, risk is part of the game when you're reading or watching
mhm,
movies or music or anything, right?
mhm.
So, there's a lot of female writers that I've been like Gail Simone, phenomenal writer. I can't even think of any more right now. This is embarrassing.
I put you on the
But
spot though.
yeah, no, but like a Catwoman is a character who I'm like super into right now. Like I've just picked up a bunch of stuff of hers I'm interested in. In the X-Men, there's a lot of female characters: Rogue, Jean Grey, Storm, who I'm like
Yeah,
I love them. Clarice Claremont did a great job of including more female characters into the X-Men and like making them as lead characters. I love in Batman, I love Oracle or Batgirl.
yeah.
I think she's so great. She's so great. I just love that she's so smart and like just a nerd. So yeah, I'm trying to get as much diversity in my books. I don't only read superhero comics. I'm really big into indies. So
Uh-huh.
like independent publishers, just creators who own their own stories and they just want to tell a good story themselves.
Yeah,
So I've been trying to read more stuff like that. There's a writer named Sarah Gailey, who's a novelist, but she also like did a comic book. It's called Eat the Rich. It was like a really big story and just like the gap between extremely wealthy people and just like regular normal middle class people
we can
or even
all
like
sort of
mid to low.
identify with that, can't we? Obviously.
Yeah. So it was like a book where the rich people they literally eat people who are serving them,
Ooh,
and yeah. So I can tell you more about it if you're interested. So basically, the way the premise of the story is like imagine that you are a person who is struggling to get a job,
yeah.
and you got a medical emergency, you're in severe debt or any kind of debt, just like in severe crippling debt.
So you're just plugging in the general tropes of it that everyone sort of goes through at some point in
Yeah,
life, and you could have been at this moment. You could have been that person. So yeah, I
and
get it.
and and then you're given the opportunity to work. Your
Uh-huh.
employer will give you all of your insurance, your insurance, they'll cover your debt and they'll cover it for your kids. Like you're set, you're fine. You could buy a house. Financially, you have no woes.
Yes,
But the but in the contract is, but we might eat you one day. And we don't
might.
know when, but it's gonna happen. One day it's gonna happen, but we're gonna have to eat you. And people sign up for it because they need the money.
And also because they, like you mentioned, in some cases their family are taken care of and everything as well.
Exactly.
So is that
So
in perpetuity?
yeah, the contract is forever.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating story. So Sarah Gailey is like a really good writer who throws in ideas that I think are kind of more about like our society, and the
Yeah.
problematic ideas that we have, because employment a lot of times is just to survive. I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the other thing. We go back to the ethical quandaries and, the questions that are raised. And through comic books, we can really hold up a mirror to society. Like, what would you do in this scenario? How would you feel? How would you react? And I think that's one of the great things about reading comic books,
Yeah.
and and when you can plug yourself in, and you become that person in the moment, or that hero, or even that villain in some cases, like where you might identify with a villain and say, I understand where they might have been coming from. Magneto, right? In
Oh
X,
yeah.
you might understand where he's coming from. Like, he just wants to protect, the rest of the mutants. And the way he goes about it might not be right, but you can identify with these people. And I think that's one of the great things about comic books. You spoke about a lot of what you collect, and you've obviously got a lot of the bigger publisher, and then you've got a lot of the indies. I noticed in when I look at a lot of the photos on your page and watch your reels, you have quite the extensive collection of trade paperbacks, and
Yeah.
also like the omnibus and things like that. But you also have long boxes. What's your preferred way to read and collect your comics?
Great question. So I read comics to the single issue format, which is like, just like a 32 page like
Yep.
magazine like story, right?
Yep.
I read trade paperbacks, which are like six usually collected into one book, which is soft cover usually. And honestly, like that's probably the best way to do it, just because it's so portable and
I agree.
comfortable, and you're not really worried to like bend the pages and ruin the condition of your book. Because
Uh-huh.
if you pick up a book that you get it from the comic store and it gets a tiny little dent on the corner. If you wanted to resell that, it loses all its value, which is kind of ridiculous. So I don't enjoy selling comic books. The only time I ever do it is when I need more money.
Yeah.
So I'm not really big about, so my single issues, I'm not like a big collector of those. I collect those if they're comic books that are like really important to me. So like I have the first Static Shock in comic books, and I have it signed by its original creator, and I have the most rare version of that. Like that's like a book that like I cherish because that character means so much to me. I got
Yeah.
the first Miles Morales because that was a big one. The Ultimate Comics or Ultimate Spider-Man, that series I told you about, that like that's what got me into the hobby. I have the first one of that, right? So like I have those books that mean a lot to me, but if I'm picking it up monthly at the comic store off the wall, I don't really care about it too much, but I take care of it. That's why I put it in that storage system. The omnibus that I have, the omnibus are usually like, the sticker price will say like 125 US dollars, 150 US dollars. Like, so
Yeah.
these books are massive in stacks. I usually pay 60% of the price because
Okay.
there's a lot of retailers who will sell them at heavily discounted rates.
Yeah.
Walt's Comic Shop does international sales. If anybody's listening who's interested in buying like really big, heavy books like that, in the US, I get my books from Organic Price Books, and in stock trades. They got really good deals. But anyways, those books have so much story in them. So like
Mm.
you'll get over 1,000 pages of from one creative team, and it's like a full story from A to Z. So
Mhm.
that's the way that you're gonna guarantee get the full picture. That will take a lot more time to read, but if you're a fan of the character, it's a definitely worthwhile investment. So that's like what the biggest value of my collection is. Mostly it's
Mhm.
omnibus. Um, so I have omnibus, I have trade paperbacks, I have some hardcover ones that are smaller, and then I have those single issues. So that's my answer is like I actually prefer read. Oh no, the last thing that I do read, I read digitally, so I'll read it on my phone
Ah,
literally.
I was
Yeah.
going
So
to
like
ask about
today,
that as well.
my daughter fell asleep in the car, and she's a sensitive sleeper, so I was like, I'm not waking her up. So I didn't have any books on me, so I took out my phone and I'm reading on one of my apps. So
Nice. Well, so trade paperbacks is the most preferred.
it's the most convenient, it's the most comfortable reading
Yeah,
style.
I
And for
agree.
anybody who's curious as to like, I want to read a comic book, I would never recommend reading single issues. I think it's like watching a random episode of a TV show, like
Uh-huh.
episode 6 of like, the fourth season of Lost. It's like you're not gonna get it.
Yeah.
I would consider a trade paperback as like a season, so it's better to pick up a season of a story.
Yes.
An omnibus is the entire series.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to describe it. And I'm the same. Like you can't see off camera, but there's a whole other bookshelf or a couple of bookshelves to the side here that are full of trade paperbacks.
Nice.
As well as I've got deluxe editions, and I've also got a couple of the omnibus from the Sandman
Oh, hey,
series
yeah,
from Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman being my favorite author of all time,
yeah, he's amazing.
in books, and also love his comics as well. So yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think describing them as a season, picking up a season, it's a
Yeah,
great way to talk about it. Yeah, perfect.
and I
In
think when
digital,
people are
so
just to
you go,
jump in
you go.
a real quick thing, like if a person is like seeing, Batman volume 6, like that's kind of intimidating because you're like, oh, do I need to know what happened in the other volumes? And the truth is you really don't. Like comics are usually written in that like volume format
Uh-huh.
anyways. So I think for anybody who's listening and is like thinking about what's the best way to do this, any volume, just like pick a character you like, and if it looks interesting to you, give it a go. It's going to be a risk no matter what, but might as well risk it with a character you're interested in.
Excellent advice, and that's one of the reasons I like talking to someone like yourself who has a bit more extensive collection, a bit more experience with reading and essentially going through multiple different versions of formats, so that you can give that sort of advice. That's really good advice. And going back to the digital stuff you were talking about, what's your app of choice that you use to read comics on?
All right, so I don't have that much experience with digital. So there's an app called Hoopla in the US. If you have a library card, you get access to tons of comic books basically for free.
Nice.
So that's I would, if you're in the States and you can't buy any books, that's my first recommendation. Reading digitally is super satisfying because you don't get any. You read everything panel to panel,
Uh-huh.
so you get when you're reading a book and like it's a really intense part and your eye just drifts a little bit and you
Hmm.
find out like, oh, the person's gonna be fine, the main
Hmm.
character's not gonna die, he's good. Like that happens when you're reading digitally. That does not happen because you're reading it in a swipe format, which is like panel to panel to panel to panel.
Yes.
So but I read on the Kindle app, so it's like Amazon. I have Kindle Unlimited, which is like $15 a month, where I get access to a ridiculous amount of comic books, but also like regular novels.
Hmm.
So I do read regular novels too, like just all text books, a lot of times for work or something like that. And that gets me the opportunity to read those too. But if you're really big into Marvel Unlimited is the one that most of my friends like are obsessed with. Comixology is Amazon's service, and I heard it's not that great. And then DC Unlimited, I think it's DC Unlimited or DC Connect. I forget what it's called, but DC has their own version as well.
Nice. All right, I'm going to get into the harder questions now. I told you before we started recording I wasn't going to really ask you the tough questions, but I'm
All
going to
right.
get into the tough questions now. Although maybe it's not a tough question. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Who would win in a fight between Bane and Hulk?
I mean, Hulk breaks planets. So literally, Hulk is immortal in canon right now. He literally cannot die. You can rip his head off; he's not dying. So yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah, I figured that was going to be the answer, and I probably would have answered the same way as well. But in Hulk, because I noticed you're currently reading Hulk. I think Red
I'm reading Planet Hulk.
Planet Hulk.
It's okay. I mean, it's good. It's okay.
Yeah,
Not every book, this is what happens when you're an avid reader. Not every book you read is great.
yeah,
And
that's true.
uh and I don't know, I'm going to ask you this question. What if you pick up a book, what percentage of the time do you read the entire thing? Or do you ever read a book and say like,
Mm.
I'm not reading this? Like I'm or even if it's terrible, you still commit to finishing it.
So here's a little bit about my background and my history is that many years ago, before I got into working in the industry that I am now, and before I got into being working in office and corporate environments and things like that, I started in retail. And my last retail job that I worked in was in a bookstore, a
Okay.
discount bookstore that I worked in for 2 years, and I was a manager at. And so I would constantly pick up books. I still have, as I mentioned, I've got a lot of books on the other shelves, many of which have not been read because I
Mhm.
would come home at payday with a whole bag full of books, and my girlfriend would be like, "Oh, great, more books. Where are we going to put
That's how
these?"
I am.
So I tend to. I mean, I could probably get into one or two chapters of a book before I know, all right, I'm probably going to settle in and I'm going to go through the whole thing. If I'm not feeling it, I put it down and it'll go back on the shelf. And because I think it's the same thing with sometimes picking up comics, right? You've got to be
Mhm.
in the right frame of mind, mood to read a certain type of comic. I mean, reading a Batman comic for me is fairly easy, and like
Yeah.
there's like a fun element to that. But then reading something that's uh, a bit more serious, like a novel, or even reading something like The Boys, which again, a lot of fun to read, but also
It's
it's
intense.
pretty full on in its
Yeah.
content and subject matter. So sometimes you got to be in the right frame of mind to read that. And I'm a big Garth Ennis fan. I love The Boys, love the TV show,
Yeah.
what they've done with it. I was a massive fan of the comics well before that. So you've got to be in the right frame of mind, I think. And that for me, there are many books that I probably picked up to answer your question, started reading, one or two chapters in, I'm not feeling it, put it back on the shelf. In
Yeah.
some cases, I've never picked them up again. And when I've downsized the collection over time, some of them I'm like, okay, this doesn't seem like something that interests me now. I picked this up 5 years ago. My tastes may have changed. It's not really something that really interests me. I'll donate it.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of times where that happens, but there are other books that you just read, and I think authors, you have certain. I think the same thing can be true of comics, where you have certain authors and their writing style you can
Yeah.
just settle straight into,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just like breathing, right? It's easy, it's just natural to read, and you'll just, before you know it, you've read a whole book or you've read a whole comic by a
Yeah.
certain author. So yeah, that's long answer to your question,
Well,
but
it sounds like you're okay with saying like, "Hey, not right now."
yeah, you have to be. I think
Yeah.
I think this is the other thing, right? So there are instances where I've done that with a book, and then I've come back maybe a couple of years later, I picked it up and I've read it and I've read the whole thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and I've really enjoyed it. But again, you've got to be in the right frame of mind sometimes
Mhm.
to do that and to experience that and to go through that story. Because otherwise, if you try and push through it, you'll just, it'll take forever. It'll sit on the shelf, sit on the shelf, and then you'll pick it
Mhm.
up, read a few pages, put it down. You'll come back a couple of weeks later, pick it up, and it just, you don't. There's no enjoyment, I think, to something feeling forced. You've got to be in the right frame of mind to do that. What
You know,
about
I
yourself? What's your experience with that?
so I'm trying to get more comfortable with stopping.
Yeah,
Like, and honestly, like I think it's probably like 80%. So like 80% of the time I'll finish the book, that I'm holding and I'm reading.
yeah,
If it's a single issue series that I'm picking up like the next episode,
yeah,
every month, then I'm really quick with those. Like I'm like, that was not fun. I did not like it. I'm done. Cold turkey, like
yeah,
you're out
yeah,
of here.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm like getting rid of this book out of my house. Like I don't even want it in my house. I,
yeah.
I let go of things really quickly. Like I don't like to keep
Oh, that's
too
good.
much stuff.
As a
Yeah.
collector, that's really good trait to have.
Well, I'm so curious about your show because you read so many you talk to so many people and I think like there's a thing to like hoarding, right? Like hoarding is just collecting without organization, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's basically
correct.
what it is.
Yeah, without a
Um
purpose.
yeah, without a purpose,
Mhm.
without organization or without a system, right?
Yeah,
Like and I think that I'm always very aware of like what I'm doing. I'm bringing in stuff constantly that brings me joy. At the time, I'm excited about it, but I'm also super intentional about like if I'm not into this, if I don't look at this and feel positive things, I am letting you go. I am no longer going to keep this in my home. I'm gonna find you a new home. Someone
Yeah.
else is gonna take you and make you, and you're gonna make them really happy, right? Um, so I know, and I'm really big about that. Do you feel like, do you ever ask collectors like what's their system of like letting go of things? Like, do you think that most collectors that you've talked to just keep, like they buy and they keep forever with no intention of letting go, or do they have a system?
Albert, you've flipped the script. It's become
I'm just curious. I'm curious because
you're the new host. I'm the one on the hot seat now. No, I love it. I love it. um, the yeah, we there's been a couple of conversations where we sort of talk about um, like how do you organize, how do you track this sort of stuff, and then
yeah,
in some cases I'll ask people what would you keep if you had to get rid of the whole collection. There are collectors that I've spoken to who, for example, and it's funny you talk about when you had your reading abilities, the challenges that you had when you were younger. The Harry Potter collector that I had on actually is dyslexic.
wow,
And for her, that was a bit of a challenge reading the books, but she loved them so much she pushed through and she got through the whole series. But her collection, she's actually a Guinness World Record holder, and she has
mm,
thousands of items. So her house is overflowing, and for her, trying to downsize her collection has been a real tough task because
mm,
she at one point just wanted to collect everything, and also because she has a YouTube channel, she was getting sent a lot of things to review as well. And so it almost became like a burden. I've spoken about the burden. There was a Lego collector I had on where spoke about essentially the burden of collecting, and it can. What's the old saying from Fight Club? That something about the things you collect own you, or something. I'm paraphrasing. I got that
yeah,
totally butchered the saying there. The things you own end up owning you, or something along those lines.
yeah. I think I remember that line.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was about consumerism and being tied to certain identity of things that you collect, or that becomes your identity. And so yeah, I don't specifically ask that question. To go back to your original question, I don't specifically ask the question of how do you let go of items, but
Yeah,
more how do they track them? How do they, how, where do they put them? Like, what's the problem with space? I always talk about space being the enemy of collectors and stuff as
yeah,
well.
for sure.
And I think that's probably a great question that I should ask a bit more. You know,
For me, I had an apartment in the Bronx. I live in New Jersey now. Every New Yorker, I'm a traitor. I'm sorry, guys.
I
Um,
wasn't going to bring it up,
I
Albert.
know, I know. I feel like I have to. I have to.
You outed yourself.
Yes, it's true. I'm a New Jersey man now. It's been a year. But I have a basement and I have space. I have
Yes.
space here, right? And even this wall, there's no comics on this wall right behind me, so I have more room to grow. um, but no, it was a intentional thing when I'm looking for a new home. I'm like, all right, I need space for my stuff. That makes me happy, right?
Hmm.
And it's just, how do you organize it? How do you present it, right? Because comic books live in a box.
Yes.
Um, so if I have a comic that I spent hundreds of dollars on and I'm really happy about it, brings me joy, I don't want it to live in a box. I want it to present beautifully. I want to display it somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's like, I think that's a big part of where I'm at with my relationship with my hobby. It's like, okay, how do I extract as much joy out of it as possible?
Yeah.
Because it does take a lot of my mind space. It takes a lot of my financial resources, just because I love it. I've made a lot of wonderful friends out of it. I'm talking to people like you,
Yeah.
like really open doors that I'm so grateful for. But I want to still make sure that like I have a healthy relationship with the hobby. And that it's not just like, because my wife is like, hey, we gotta stop talking about comics.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, all right, thanks for bringing me back a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely elements of your question that I've had the conversation with people about. Even like at the start of this season, the Pop Fox Marisol that I had on, she collects vinyl figures, and her collection has evolved, and she does sell off some of the items, and she has had to sort of uh, watch out for space. Like what is she collecting? Essentially, not so much or just getting rid of things, but
Yeah.
uh, sort of reining in the types of things that she collects, maybe the certain lines that she collects. So for you, it might be, in your experience now reading all these different comics, you may say, okay, I'm going to try and stick to these certain characters, and these are
Yeah.
going to be the main ones that I collect and that I read. And if it's not them, then maybe I might read them in a digital format and I can delete after I'm
Yeah.
done. But in the physical version, I'm going to stick specifically to Static Shock or something like that. And that's going to be the identity of what I collect, or that's going to be what I love seeing on the shelf.
Yeah.
But you're not specifically stopping yourself from reading those other things. You're just a smarter way of collecting, I guess,
Well,
is one way to
you know,
put it.
I think especially with comics, like it's really two hobbies. It's really two separate hobbies, right? It's reading comic books
Uh-huh.
and collecting comic books.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah,
So
100%.
and like you said before that you used to come home with books that you have not read. That
Yeah.
is my curse as well. I literally just bought two books that I don't know when I'm going to read them because I'm not like that excited about reading them. And I spent like $120. And I'm like, oh man, that probably wasn't the greatest idea. But like, it's the fear that if I don't get it now, I'm going to miss out in the future because these things are not in the market for a long time. The omnibus, that's what I'm really talking about. Like omnibus
Yeah. Yeah.
are they have when they're in print, it's only for a certain amount of time. So like that Sandman omnibus that you're talking about that you have in your
Mhm.
collection, that's a really expensive book right now. If you wanted to resell it, you could sell it for hundreds of dollars.
I'm not
Um,
reselling it.
yeah, but
I
most
just
people
love
are
the
not,
story. I love Neil
and
Gaiman so much. But
that's
yeah,
what makes it so valuable
yeah,
because so many people love it. They're like, no, this is incredibly important. Like it was expensive when you bought it, probably. So, but a person who maybe watched the show and is like, I'm going to get into it, and they read it digitally and they're like, oh my God, I need to have this on my shelf. I don't want to get these absolute editions. I want to get the omnibus edition.
uh-huh.
And that's what happens to like a lot of items. So that's what I know too much information about like what happens to these books when they get unavailable. So I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I need to get it now.
There's
My problem
there's definitely a FOMO that happens with collecting, and then
all
if
the
you
time.
if you do track what things cost, and you think, and there's always that bit in the back of a collector's mind, like, oh, I could always sell this later and make a pretty penny on it, and then
Yeah.
it ends up on your shelf, and you're like, I'm never selling that. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I convinced myself that I was going to sell it because of the value. But I mean, you also don't want to be trapped with like buying three versions of something, and then you have to.
Oh
Then
man.
next thing you know, 3 months later, you haven't sold it. It's been sitting on the shelf, and then it's gone down 50% in value or something.
And
That
I've
would.
been down that road. I've been down that
Yeah.
road and like really like I had three hobbies for a time. The third hobby was selling comics. And I found that I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy at all.
Yeah.
With like if I doubled the price on I bought it for $60, sold for 120, or I sold it for $200. I wasn't happy. I was anxious. I was like, okay, I need more. Like I need, and it wasn't a good
Mm,
feeling. And ultimately, like what I always try to go back to when I'm thinking about my relationship with this hobby is like, how does it, when I was a kid, what was the excitement that I felt? And do I still feel that today?
I
And
love
the
you.
answer is yes. I absolutely am like blown away when I read a new, I just finished reading Batman White Knight. Have you read it?
I haven't. I've actually just recently purchased it, and I've got the Harley Quinn trade paperback version as well,
Yeah.
because I know I need to read it. And the Harley Quinn collector that
Good.
I had on first season, she actually was in communications with the author.
Sean
Um,
Murphy. That's
yeah,
amazing.
Sean Murphy, who actually, because she's so, like, she's a long time Harley Quinn fan.
Yeah.
He actually was communicating with her when he was trying to come up with the character for Harley Quinn and in that
Wow.
universe. So you go back and
Wow.
listen to the episode if you want.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
but yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, Angel. So shout out to Angel. She's very fortunate that she got to communicate with Sean
That's so
during that
cool.
time.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's really cool. I'm definitely gonna check it out. But I bring it up because it was such a good read, and like
yeah,
remember we were saying before, like when you're reading, when someone's writing style is so smooth that
yeah,
you don't even realize you're reading. You're like
yeah.
halfway through the book, and you're like, oh my god, what time is it? You know what I mean? Like it's like that kind of experience.
I felt like that
Um,
with Tom Taylor when I was reading
oh,
Injustice. Yeah,
and yeah, I just finished Injustice too, like
yeah,
literally like this month, and Tom Taylor's a phenomenal writer.
and
I
Australian.
think Brian Michael Bendis, phenomenal writer. His writing is so quick and smooth.
Yeah,
It's a lot of these modern writers. They're just like they've mastered the conversational feeling
uh-huh,
of reading a
uh-huh.
book, and whenever I'm reading, so I just had that, and it's like a glow almost like that you have for the rest of the day when you're reading these stuff. And I still remember feeling that when I was younger, you know? So I'm thinking about your first question was like, how did I get into this? I actually went to the public library in my neighborhood when I was like maybe 12. And I remember there was a book called Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yes.
And yes, so not everybody who's listening knows what this is, but it's for people who are comic book nerds. Like it's an
Mm-hmm.
iconic story
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm. Myself.
DC basically takes all of these universes and smashes them together in an effort to clean up their storylines because they had like two Wonder Girls and like two different Superboys and all this stuff. But anyways, I looked at this book and it had like 100 superheroes on it, and I knew a bunch of them, but there were so many that I didn't know. And I remember like telling myself, I want to read this so I can learn all these characters. And I read the book. I didn't understand anything that was happening. I didn't know any of the characters. I know their power sets, any of the rules. And I remember completely being blown away. I was just like, I need to read this again and again and again until I got it. It was just great. So that awe that I had, that feeling of just like wonder and just like shock, that's what I'm
Love
always
it.
looking for. Yeah.
I love it. Look, we were coming up to time roughly, so I'm going to wrap this up. We've got a couple more quick questions I want to get through, though. And actually, just following up from what you were just saying about Crisis on Infinite Earth and
Yeah.
the smashing together of all the different characters. All right, I'm gonna ask you another question. Maybe this will be a little bit more difficult one. If you had to cancel out, and I don't mean like cancel as in
Cancel.
cancel
Yeah.
culture, but if you were a writer at Marvel or DC and your editor came to you and said, "We need to kill off one of the characters forever,"
Which characters?
which character would yeah. So not one would not don't pick your favorite. Which
No, that's
one
good.
would you get rid of from those
Okay.
universes?
So that's a great question. All right. So I am a big fan of character deaths. I think
Uh-huh.
it's necessary. I think you need to start closing stuff up. So this is a controversial one. Controversial. Okay.
I love it.
People are gonna have feelings about this. I think Peter Parker needs to. I think his story should end.
Oh, I
And
got goosebumps when you said.
I'm
I literally
sorry. I'm
got
sorry.
goosebumps when
And
you
it,
said that.
and the reason I think that is, and it happened in an ultimate, it's happened in stories,
Yeah.
and the reason is he needs he's been the same character for 60 years. He's been a teenage or adult boy who's got girl problems, and he can never find happiness or peace. And I'm not saying like peace is going to be killing him. I mean like let's just close it up. Allow this man to rest, to end, and allow a new generation to step in and take over. He can retire. Let him retire. That's my goal. But I think that Peter Parker, come on, let's move on. Let's move forward. I'm all for getting some closure and some like chapters for these characters. He can come back in 50 years, maybe, like they did with Captain America.
I was about to say
But
like an old man Steve Rogers and like just let him pass on the shield, but
exactly.
in this case pass on the web. I don't know which way
Yeah.
to feel that.
The web shooters,
The shooters, yeah, yeah. Okay.
You weren't expecting that. You weren't
No,
expecting that.
you like I literally I'm not
All
kidding.
right.
I actually got
Then
goosebumps when you said that.
maybe that's too much. Maybe Mary Jane. Mary Jane should go.
Oh, oh, breaking my heart over and over again. What about a DC? Would you have a DC?
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same thing about these traditional people, but I'll give you a different answer, different reason. Um, let's say, oh man, um, there's these like, so in I don't know. This is hard. I feel like people are gonna message me and they're gonna be like, "Yo, you've gone way too far." Um,
You need to be silenced, Albert.
I'm gonna get canceled. That's what's gonna happen. I was gonna say the Flash. I was gonna say like Barry Allen. But no, but you know what? I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say Barry Allen. Okay, Barry Allen. There's already two Flashes. We don't need two Flashes. There's Wally West and there's
Yeah.
Barry Allen. There's two Flashes. They have the same title. It's not necessary. They have similar characters.
I can get that. I get that. That's yeah. I don't
There you
think
go.
that's a bad answer. I think that's a fair answer.
You know, older people like Barry Allen because he's like from the like in the 80s, not even 80s, like before that. Wally West, most people like Wally West. So they'll be fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring up the Flash because I think Ezra was trying to cancel themselves anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
just by default. Okay, so perfect answers. I loved it. And yeah, it's good to sort of flip things on their head sometimes and look at things from a different direction.
Yeah.
But another question, just to, as I said, trying to wrap it up quickly. So I spoke about the different versions of the comics, you know, that you have, the omnibus and everything like that.
Yep.
And you mentioned about having certain ones that are prizes that you would probably put on the wall.
Yeah.
I bought my first slab the other day.
Mm.
So I got a CGC 9.8 first
Hey.
edition of The Killing Joke.
Oh, hey.
Yeah,
It's a
so
great book.
I had to get, I had to go with one of the classics. Do you also collect slabs?
So I have two. And that's it. I used to have more. I have like four more, and again, it's from like selling, where like they're paying. I want to get out. I want to get them out of here.
Yeah,
I got really into slabs for a little bit of time, and then again, I caught myself getting too into it and like kind of losing the joy in the hobby,
yeah,
just because like a 9.8 and a 9.6 is very very similar. So
yes.
much, but the price is sometimes thousands of dollars difference, or it can be
Uh-huh.
hundreds of dollars difference, and at the end of the day, like I didn't buy that book because of of a crack on the spine or a little dent on the corner. I bought the book because it means a lot something to me.
Yeah,
But if I'm buying like my dream book is Giant Size X-Men #1. It's the first like Storm. It's the first Colossus, first Nightcrawler. It's like the third appearance of Wolverine, and it's a book that I want really bad. But when I buy it, I'm probably gonna buy it slabbed because I want to know the condition of it. I want it
uh-huh.
to be like. So I'm intentional about trying to stay away from slabs because when I had a relationship with it, it was really negative. I was getting too caught up in it. I was really
Yeah.
caught up in the selling in I was looking at like, what's the value of it now? Like, oh, that's,
Mm.
and again, like I'm trying to have a healthy relationship with the hobby.
And keep the joy.
Exactly. Right. And, it was just, I have a buddy of mine who grounds me a lot. He's like, bro, why did you want the book in the first place? Is it to sell? Because if that's the reason you want it, then there's no shame in saying that.
Do you want to
But
give him a
like,
shout out? Who's this buddy?
his name is Morbius Comics. He's a big old school collector from the Bronx. He's been collecting for a long time. His collection, you should have him on if you want a collector. This guy, his collection is insane.
Shout out to
And
Morbius Comics.
yeah, no, for real, Morbius Comics. This guy's incredible. But he does a good job of just like grounding the relationship with the hobby. He's like, yo, like if you're into this to sell, then say it and like be about that. But recognize that it's a different hobby. And I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, like that's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to read good stories and then tell people about it and like tell people, the good things that I'm reading.
I
So
love it. I love
yeah.
it. Albert, I think that's a great way to finish as well. I think, that's a great piece of advice for people. And, as much as I've loved having you on talking about comics in general, just the collection side that we've delved into has been amazing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So before I do wrap it up and let you go, I always get people to plug their socials. Where can they find you?
So first, gotta say thank you for having me on. I've actually really had a wonderful time. I'm upset that it's only been like 50 minutes. It should be a 3-hour Joe Rogan style podcast. Okay, that's
It could be in some of the people I talk to. Trust me.
But the places you can find me, TikTok, Albert Loves Comics, Instagram, Albert Loves Comics, YouTube a little bit, not really. But yeah, Instagram and TikTok is mostly the place. I have a little Etsy shop on Etsy shop where I sell sketchbooks, because people who are interested in going to like comic book conventions and
Yeah.
getting like a signature or a painting from their favorite artist, they go to like an art store and the sketchbooks don't look great. So
Mm.
I make my own custom comic book sketchbooks that are high quality paper. So, and I sell it for like $20. I don't sell it for a lot. So yeah, those are my 3 spots where I live. Yeah, that's it.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining me from New Jersey and not New York.
Ah.
I know. It's two totally different sides of the world. So yeah, thank you for being on the show. I really enjoyed having you. I'll make sure to put those links for people to check it out, and they should definitely go and check out your page. I think it's been really fun. As I said, I've been following you for a while and really enjoy your content. So I'll definitely be still following and still keeping in touch with you. And yeah, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Yeah, me too.
If you liked the episode, please consider following or subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also join me on Instagram at Collecting Heroes, where you can see photos of the collections of the people that I'm talking to, as well as some of my own.